The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds into the amber sky of 1876. Josephine Greene flinched at the sound, her hands trembling as she pulled the reins of her exhausted mare to a halt. Fort Kearny, Nebraska stood before her, a collection of weathered buildings silhouetted against the setting sun, promising sanctuary she desperately needed, but wasn't sure she deserved. The journey from St. Louis had nearly broken her. 3 weeks of hard travel, sleeping with one eye open, jumping at every snapped twig. Josephine's once fine traveling dress was now stained with dust and memories she couldn't wash away. Her auburn hair hung loose around her shoulders, having long since escaped the pins that once held it in place, much like she had escaped the life that once held her. As she approached the town's main street, Josephine noticed a tall man stepping out of the sheriff's office. He paused on the wooden boardwalk, his gaze finding her immediately. Even from this distance, she could see his eyes were the same shade as the vast Nebraska sky. He wore no badge, but the way he carried himself spoke of authority, shoulders straight, stride confident, hand resting casually near the holster on his hip. "Evening, madam," he called as she drew closer. "You look like you've ridden a fair piece." Josephine tightened her grip on the reins. "I have." She didn't offer more. "Name's Isaac Norwood," he said, approaching slowly as one might a spooked horse. "Town marshal. We don't get many lone female travelers through Fort Kearny." "I'm just passing through," Josephine replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Need supplies, maybe a night's rest before moving on." Isaac's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in her disheveled appearance and the expensive saddle that didn't match her worn clothes. "Might find both at Widow Miller's boarding house down the street. She's fair with her prices and doesn't ask questions that aren't her business." Relief flooded through Josephine. No questions was exactly what she needed. "Thank you, Marshal," she said, gathering her reins. "Miss." He waited, eyebrow raised. She hesitated. "Greene. Josephine Greene." "Well, Miss Greene," Isaac said with a slight tip of his hat, "welcome to Fort Kearny. Mind yourself after dark. Town's mostly peaceful, but trouble has a way of finding those looking for it." "I'm not looking for trouble," she said quietly. "I'm running from it." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Before he could respond, shouting erupted from the saloon down the street. With a nod in her direction, Isaac strode toward the commotion, leaving Josephine to guide her mare toward the boarding house. Widow Miller was a stout woman with silver-streaked hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She took Josephine's money without comment, showed her to a small but clean room, and mentioned that dinner would be served in an hour. Alone at last, Josephine sank onto the narrow bed, her body aching from weeks in the saddle. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a wanted poster she'd torn from a board in a town 3 days back. Her own face stared back at her, the likeness poor enough that she might go unrecognized, but the reward substantial enough to tempt anyone who suspected. $500 for Josephine Greene, wanted for murder. The tears came then, hot and silent. She hadn't meant to kill him. Francis Blackley had been charming at first, wealthy, handsome, attentive. By the time she discovered his true nature, she was already his wife. The beating started slowly, always followed by apologies and gifts. Then they worsened, and the apologies stopped. The night she finally fought back, his gun had been within reach. The struggle had been brief. The gunshot that ended his life still echoed in her nightmares. She'd fled St. Louis immediately, taking only what she could carry and the money she'd secretly saved. Now, 3 weeks later, she was still running, the weight of her past like a shadow that wouldn't leave her side. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She quickly tucked the poster away and wiped her tears. "Dinner's ready," came Widow Miller's voice. "I'll be right down," Josephine replied, composing herself. She splashed water on her face from the basin, smoothed her hair, and steeled herself for the prospect of facing strangers. The boarding house dining room held only 3 other guests, an elderly couple who nodded politely, but returned to their conversation, and Marshal Isaac Norwood. His presence sent a jolt of anxiety through her, but he merely offered a courteous nod as Widow Miller directed Josephine to a seat across from him. "Didn't expect to see you here, Marshal," Josephine said cautiously as she settled into her chair. "Isaac, please." "I only take my meals at the saloon when I have to," he replied. "Sarah Miller sets the best table in 3 counties." The widow huffed at the compliment but smiled as she placed bowls of steaming stew before them. "Flattery won't get you an extra helping, Isaac Norwood." "Never has, but I keep trying," he said with a warm smile that transformed his serious face. Despite her wariness, Josephine found herself watching him. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind. A small scar crossed his right eyebrow, and his hands, though strong, moved with surprising gentleness. She noticed he wore no wedding ring. "What brings you to Fort Kearny, Miss Greene?" he asked after several minutes of silence. Josephine had prepared a story, but looking into his direct blue gaze, she found herself reluctant to lie completely. "A fresh start," she said. "My circumstances in St. Louis became untenable." Isaac nodded slowly. "Lot of that going around these days. War's been over 11 years, but seems like folks are still looking to rebuild their lives." "Did you fight?" she asked, grateful for the shift away from her own circumstances. "Union cavalry. Came west afterward like many did. Found I had a knack for keeping peace." He took a bite of stew, then added, "Though some days I wonder if I wouldn't be better off raising horses instead." "Do you have family here?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents before the war. Had a brother, but he didn't come back from Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. He shrugged. "Most everyone's carrying something. Question is whether you let it define your path forward." The words hit her like a physical blow. Was that what she was doing? Letting Francis define her future even after death? "And what if the burden is too heavy to set down?" she asked softly. Isaac studied her with those perceptive eyes. "Then you find someone to help carry it for a spell, until you're strong enough to decide what to do with it." Before she could respond, the door to the boarding house burst open, and a young boy of perhaps 12 rushed in. "Marshal." "There's trouble at Hanson's livery. 2 men arguing over a horse sale, and Mr. Hanson says they've both drawn guns." Isaac was on his feet instantly. "Excuse me, Miss Greene. Duty calls." To the widow he added, "Save my plate if you would, Sarah. I'll be back once I've sorted this out." After he'd gone, Josephine finished her meal quickly and retreated to her room. She needed rest, but her conversation with the marshal had left her unsettled. He was too observant, too perceptive. Fort Kearny couldn't be more than a brief stop. By tomorrow evening, she needed to be moving on. But to where? She'd been heading west with only the vaguest notion of reaching California or Oregon, somewhere far enough that Francis's family connections couldn't reach. Somewhere she could truly start over. But every town felt like a trap waiting to spring, every stranger a potential threat. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams where Francis found her, his eyes dead and accusing, his hands reaching for her throat. Dawn found her already dressed and packing her meager belongings. She would buy supplies, rest her mare another day, and leave at first light tomorrow. The plan comforted her with its simplicity. Fort Kearny was already bustling when Josephine stepped onto the boardwalk. She made her way to the general store, keeping her head down, conscious of every glance thrown her way. Inside, She selected basics: jerky, coffee, hardtack, and ammunition for the small pistol she carried. The storekeeper, a jovial man with mutton chop whiskers, chatted amiably as he totaled her purchases. "Just passing through, are you? Shame that town could use more pretty faces." "You traveling alone, miss? These roads can be mighty dangerous for a solitary lady." "I can manage," Josephine replied tersely, counting out coins. "No doubt, no doubt. Still, the stage comes through tomorrow if you're looking for safer passage west." "More expensive than riding alone, but worth considering." Josephine paused. She hadn't considered the stage coach. It would mean traveling with others, which carried risks of recognition, but also offered protection and speed. "How much for a ticket to Denver?" she asked. $4.75. Stage leaves at noon sharp. It would strain her limited funds, but the prospect of reaching Denver more quickly was tempting. "I'll think on it, thank you." As she gathered her purchases, the bell above the door jingled. Josephine glanced up to see Isaac entering, his tall frame filling the doorway. Their eyes met, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest. "Miss Greene," he acknowledged with a nod. "Marshal," she replied, suddenly conscious of her flushed cheeks. "Seems we keep crossing paths." He stepped aside to let her pass, but then added, "I wonder if I might have a word with you. Outside, if that's agreeable." Dread pooled in her stomach. Had he received a wire about her? Was her description circulating among law enforcement? She nodded stiffly and followed him outside, her mind racing through possible escape routes. On the boardwalk, Isaac turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I received a telegram this morning from the sheriff in Grand Island. Seems there's been a series of robberies along the westward trails. Women traveling alone have been particular targets." Relief washed through her, followed quickly by guilt for feeling relieved. "That's concerning." "It is. I'd advise against traveling alone right now, at least until we apprehend those responsible." He paused, studying her. The stage coach tomorrow would be safer. Josephine clutched her parcels tighter. "Thank you for the warning, Marshal. I'll consider it." He seemed to hesitate, then added, "Miss Greene, I don't mean to pry, but are you in some kind of trouble? Because if you are, there might be ways I can help that don't involve you continuing to run." Her breath caught. "What makes you think I'm running?" 20 years of reading people," he said simply. "And the fact that you flinch whenever anyone raises their voice or makes a sudden movement." Shame and fear tangled inside her. "You're very observant, Marshal." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "An observation keeps me alive." For a wild moment, she considered telling him everything about Francis, about the years of abuse, about that final, terrible night. But the risk was too great. Even if he believed her, even if he sympathized, his duty would compel him to report her. "I appreciate your concern," she said finally. "But my past is too dark for sharing. I'll be moving on tomorrow one way or another." Something that might have been disappointment flickered across his face. "As you wish, but my door is open if you change your mind." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Marshal," she called, surprising herself. When he turned back, she asked, "Why would you offer help to someone you barely know?" A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Greene, even those who believe they don't." With that, he continued down the boardwalk, leaving Josephine to wonder what demons of his own Isaac Norwood might be carrying. The remainder of the day passed slowly. Josephine visited the livery to check on her mare and arranged for the horse to be well fed and rested. The livery owner, a man named Hanson with a wild beard and gentle hands, assured her the animal would be ready for travel the following day. "Fine horse," he commented as he stroked the mare's nose. "Thoroughbred stock, if I'm not mistaken. Not a common mount for someone just passing through." Josephine tensed. "She was a gift," she said shortly. Hanson merely nodded, but she could feel his curiosity like a physical presence. Another reason to leave Fort Kearny quickly. Too many observant eyes. As evening approached, Josephine found herself restless in her small room. The walls seemed to close in around her, and memories of Francis threatened to overtake her thoughts. She needed air, movement, distraction. Against her better judgment, she decided to take a short walk. Fort Kearny was transformed in the golden light of sunset. Children played in the dusty street before being called in for supper. Shopkeepers closed up for the day, exchanging friendly words with neighbors. A young couple strolled arm in arm, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. It was a glimpse of normal life, the kind Josephine had once dreamed of. Her path took her past the sheriff's office, where a lamp burned in the window. Through the glass, she could see Isaac bent over his desk, writing in what appeared to be a ledger. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes locked for a long moment before Josephine hurried on, her heart inexplicably racing. She continued to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The vastness of the landscape both terrified and comforted her. Out there, she could disappear, become anyone, leave Josephine Greene and all her sins behind. But out there also lurked dangers both natural and human, and she would face them alone. Lost in thought, she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a voice spoke behind her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Never tire of this view. Josephine whirled, her hand instinctively moving toward the small knife concealed in her pocket. Isaac stood several paces away, hands visible at his sides in a deliberate gesture of non-threat. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, keeping his distance. "Saw you walking and thought you might want company, but I can leave you to your thoughts if you prefer." She should send him away. Every moment in his presence increased the risk of him discovering who she really was, and yet, "No, it's all right, I was just contemplating." "Mind if I ask what about?" Josephine looked back to the horizon. Freedom. How something can be so frightening and so liberating at the same time. Isaac moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Freedom's a complicated thing. Some folks chase it their whole lives without ever finding it. And some have it thrust upon them when they're not ready, she murmured. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The quiet between them felt unexpectedly comfortable, as if they were old friends rather than virtual strangers. "Have you decided about tomorrow?" Isaac finally asked. "Stage or continuing alone?" "I'm still considering the stage," she admitted. "Though I don't relish the thought of being confined with strangers for days on end." Understandable. Though in my experience, strangers on a stagecoach don't remain strangers for long. Something about facing discomfort together breaks down barriers quickly. Josephine smiled despite herself. "Is that your way of saying stagecoaches are unpleasant?" "Let's just say they're an acquired taste," he chuckled. "Like whiskey or politics." His laugh was warm and genuine, and Josephine found herself responding to it, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. When was the last time she'd laughed? Before Francis, certainly, before her life had narrowed to survival and escape. "May I ask where you're headed?" Isaac inquired. "Beyond west, that is." She hesitated, then decided there was little harm in sharing this much. "Denver, initially. Beyond that." "I haven't decided. Somewhere I can start fresh." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "Denver's growing fast. Opportunities there for those willing to work hard." He glanced at her hands, which bore calluses not from labor but from weeks of handling reins. "Though I suspect hard work isn't something you shy from." "No," she agreed. "I'm not afraid of building something new. Just of the ghosts that might follow you," he said quietly. Josephine stiffened. Marshal Norwood Isaac, he corrected again. Isaac, she conceded. You seem determined to peel back layers best left undisturbed. He turned to face her fully now, his expression serious in the fading light. Only because I recognize the look of someone haunted by their past. I've seen it in the mirror often enough. We all have regrets, she said guardedly. True. But there's a difference between regret and the kind of fear that keeps you looking over your shoulder. He stepped closer, still maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Whatever you're running from, Josephine, it doesn't have to define you forever. The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. You make it sound so simple. Not simple, he corrected. Possible. There's a difference. A church bell rang in the distance, marking the hour. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had fallen between them. I should return to the boarding house, Josephine said, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of being alone with him as darkness fell. Of course. May I walk you back? She should refuse. Distance was safer, and yet, thank you, that would be kind. They walked in companionable silence, the busy day giving way to quiet evening. Lanterns glowed in windows, and from the saloon came the tinny sound of a piano. Fort Kearny was settling in for the night. At the boarding house steps, Josephine paused. Thank you for the escort, Marshal Isaac. My pleasure. He hesitated, then added, Miss Greene, I hope you'll forgive my forwardness, but I feel compelled to say this. Whatever darkness lies in your past, it need not cast its shadow on your future. There are people in this world who would help shoulder your burden if only you'd allow it. Josephine felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Why do you care what happens to me? I'm just another drifter passing through your town. Isaac's gaze was steady, unwavering. Perhaps I see something in you worth caring about. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Greene. Safe journey, whatever path you choose tomorrow. He turned and walked away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness. Josephine stood watching long after he disappeared, her thoughts in turmoil. In another life, another time. But no. Such thoughts were dangerous luxuries she couldn't afford. She climbed the stairs to her room, her decision made. Tomorrow she would take the stage coach to Denver. It was the sensible choice, the safer choice. And with each mile between her and Fort Kearny, she would push away thoughts of the marshal with the kind eyes who seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. Sleep came more easily that night, but her dreams were filled with blue eyes and gentle hands reaching for her across an ever-widening chasm. Morning dawned clear and bright. Josephine rose early, packed her few belongings, and went down to breakfast. To her relief, Isaac wasn't among the diners. She ate quickly, paid Widow Miller, and headed to the livery to arrange the sale of her mare. The money would help extend her dwindling funds, though parting with the faithful animal pained her. Hanson offered a fair price, better than she'd expected. Good horse deserves a good home, he said as he counted out the money. I'll see she's well treated. Thank you, Josephine said, giving the mare a final pat. She's carried me far. Speaking of traveling, Hanson said conversationally, heard you might be taking the stage today. News traveled fast in small towns. Yes, to Denver, Hanson frowned. Might want to check at the station before you count on that. Word is there's been trouble on the trail. Stage might be delayed. Anxiety spiked through her. What kind of trouble? Don't rightly know details. Marshal Norwood rode out early this morning to investigate some kind of incident west of town. Josephine thanked him for the information and hurried to the stage station, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. At the station, a small crowd had gathered, their expressions concerned. The station manager, a harried-looking man with spectacles, was addressing them. All I can tell you is that the stage from the west hasn't arrived, and we've received reports of possible road agents in the area. Marshal Norwood has gone to investigate, but until we know more, I cannot in good conscience allow today's stage to depart." Murmurs of disappointment and worry rippled through the crowd. Josephine felt the walls closing in. No stage meant another day in Fort Kearny, another day risking discovery, another day for her pursuers to catch up. She pushed through the crowd back to the street, her mind racing. She could still leave on her own, but without her mare, she'd be on foot until she could arrange other transportation. The nearest town was over 20 miles away, too far to walk in a day. Lost in thought, she nearly collided with a young woman carrying a basket of laundry. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Josephine apologized, steadying the basket. "No harm done," the woman replied with a smile. She appeared to be about Josephine's age, with kind eyes and blonde hair tucked neatly under a bonnet. "You look troubled. Are you waiting for the stage too?" "Yes," Josephine admitted. "I was hoping to leave today." "As was I. I'm Emma Thornton," she introduced herself. "My husband's waiting for me in Julesburg." "Josephine Greene." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you know when they expect to have news about the delay?" Emma shook her head. "No, but Marshal Norwood is the most reliable man in the territory. If anyone can sort it out quickly, it's him." Something in her tone caught Josephine's attention. "You know him well." A slight blush colored Emma's cheeks. "Everyone knows Isaac. He's been marshal here for 5 years now, kept the peace even when surrounding towns fell to chaos. She hesitated, then continued, "He saved my life once. Bandits attacked our farm, killed my father. Isaac tracked them for days, brought them to justice." "I'm sorry about your father," Josephine said softly. Emma nodded her thanks. "Isaac is a good man, deserves happiness, but he keeps to himself mostly. Carries too much from the war, folks say." She glanced up as the church bell rang the hour. "I should go. These linens won't deliver themselves. It was nice meeting you, Josephine." As Emma continued on her way, Josephine stood in the street, feeling adrift. What now? Return to the boarding house and hope the stage situation resolved quickly. Try to find alternative transportation. Her deliberation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. Several riders were entering town from the west, moving at a quick pace. At their head was Isaac, his expression grim. Behind him rode 2 men she didn't recognize, and across one of their saddles lay what appeared to be a body wrapped in canvas. The small crowd from the stage station rushed forward, questions flying. Isaac dismounted, raising his hands for quiet. "Folks, I need you to stay calm," he announced. The westbound stage was indeed attacked by road agents about 15 miles from here. The driver was killed, but the passengers are safe. We've brought back the driver's body for proper burial. The remaining bandits fled north, and I've sent word to the cavalry at Fort McPherson to intercept them. The station manager pushed forward. "What about today's eastbound stage? Can it depart?" Isaac shook his head. "Not until we're certain the route is clear. I've got men riding patrol now, but I can't in good conscience let any stage leave today. With luck, we'll resume service tomorrow." Groans and protests rose from the crowd, but Isaac remained firm. As the gathering dispersed, his eyes found Josephine standing apart from the others. He handed his reins to a deputy and approached her. "Miss Greene," he greeted her, his voice tired. "I take it you were planning to be on today's stage." "I was," she confirmed. "This delay is inconvenient for many," he agreed. "But after what I saw out there today, I won't risk civilian lives." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveled from riding. "Road agents are getting bolder. This is the 3rd attack in 2 months." Josephine studied his face, noting the lines of fatigue and worry etched around his eyes. "You look exhausted." A small smile touched his lips. "Comes with the badge. I'll rest when we've caught the men responsible." He glanced toward the boarding house. "I assume you'll need another night at Sarah's." "It seems so," she replied, trying to mask her unease. Each day in one place increased her risk. Isaac seemed to sense her discomfort. "Miss Greene, Josephine, may I speak plainly?" She nodded cautiously. "I don't know what you're running from, but I know fear when I see it. And right now, you're calculating risks like someone expecting pursuit." He kept his voice low, ensuring no passers-by could hear. "If someone's after you, I can help. That's my job." Josephine felt cornered. "No one is after me. I'm simply eager to reach Denver." Isaac's gaze was steady, penetrating. "All right, but my offer stands. Whatever it is, we might find a solution that doesn't involve you constantly looking over your shoulder." Before she could respond, a deputy called for Isaac's attention. With a tip of his hat, he left her standing in the street, her heart pounding with indecision. He was too perceptive, too interested in her circumstances. Yet something in her longed to trust him, to unburden herself of the secret she'd carried alone. The remainder of the day passed in restless anxiety. Josephine secured another night at the boarding house, then retreated to her room, venturing out only for the evening meal. Isaac didn't appear at dinner, likely busy with the aftermath of the stage attack. As darkness fell, Josephine sat by her window watching the street below. The saloon across the way was busy, light and music spilling onto the boardwalk. Men came and went, some steady on their feet, others less so. In the sheriff's office, a lamp still burned. Isaac was working late again. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Who is it?" she called, one hand moving toward her hidden knife. "It's Sarah Miller," came the reply. "May I come in?" Josephine relaxed slightly and opened the door. The widow stood there holding a steaming mug. "Thought you might like some tea," she said, offering the mug. "Help settle the nerves." "Thank you," Josephine said, surprised by the kindness. "That's very thoughtful." Sarah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "Couldn't help noticing you seemed troubled, child." "Stage delay got you worried." Josephine sipped the tea chamomile with a hint of honey. "Among other things." The older woman settled herself in the room's single chair. "Been running a boarding house for 20 years. Get so I can raid folks pretty well. And you, my dear, have the look of someone who's seen hard times." Josephine remained silent, unsure how to respond. "Don't worry," Sarah continued. "Not asking for your story, just wanted to say that Fort Kearny's a good town. Good people. If you're looking for a place to catch your breath before moving on or even to stay, you could do worse." "I appreciate that," Josephine said carefully. "But Denver is my destination." Sarah nodded. "Fair enough. Though I've noticed our marshal seems to have taken an interest in your welfare." "Isaac doesn't do that for just anyone." Heat rose in Josephine's cheeks. "Marshal Norwood is simply doing his job." A knowing smile crossed Sarah's face. "If you say so, dear." She rose to leave. "Sleep well. And remember, sometimes the thing we're running from isn't nearly as frightening as being alone." After the widow departed, Josephine sat with those words echoing in her mind. Was she more afraid of being caught or of being alone forever? The question haunted her as she prepared for bed, her thoughts repeatedly returning to Isaac's offer of help. What if she did tell him the truth? What if she laid bare the nightmare of her marriage, the years of abuse, the final deadly confrontation? Would he understand? Or would duty compel him to return her to St. Louis, to face a justice system that had failed her when she'd sought help while Francis was alive? Sleep eluded her for hours, her mind circling the same questions without finding answers. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were chaotic Francis pursuing her through endless dark corridors, and just as he was about to catch her, Isaac appearing, a lantern in hand, illuminating a path to safety. She woke at dawn, the dream still vivid. Outside, Fort Kearny was already stirring to life. Josephine dressed quickly and went downstairs, determined to learn if the stage would depart today. The dining room was empty save for an elderly gentleman reading a newspaper. As she was about to head for the stage office, Sarah emerged from the kitchen with a pot of coffee. "You're up early, Miss Greene. Breakfast won't be ready for another half hour." "I was hoping to check on the stage schedule," Josephine explained. "Ah. Well, you might want to know that Marshal Norwood rode out again before dawn with his deputies, checking the route to make sure it's safe, I expect." Josephine felt both relief and disappointment at missing him. "I see. Thank you for telling me." She walked to the stage office, where the manager informed her that no decision had been made yet about the day's departure. "Marshal's orders," he explained. "We wait until he gives the all-clear. Could be noon before we know anything." Another delay. Josephine's nerves frayed further. She decided to visit the telegraph office, thinking to inquire about alternate transportation options in nearby towns. As she crossed the street, she noticed a rider entering town at a gallop, one of Isaac's deputies. The man dismounted quickly and rushed into the sheriff's office. Something was wrong. Josephine hurried to the telegraph office where a small crowd had already gathered, murmuring anxiously. "What's happened?" she asked a woman standing nearby. "Marshal's party was ambushed," the woman replied, her face pale. "They exchanged gunfire with the road agents. Deputy Peters just rode in for help, says the marshal's been shot." The world seemed to tilt beneath Josephine's feet. Is he alive? Don't rightly know details. Peters is gathering volunteers to ride out and bring them back. Without conscious thought, Josephine pushed through the crowd and across to the sheriff's office. Inside, the young deputy was gathering weapons while several men prepared to ride. "I can help," Josephine announced, drawing surprised looks. "I have medical training." It wasn't entirely a lie. Her mother had been a nurse during the war, and Josephine had assisted her often. Deputy Peters looked skeptical. "This ain't women's business, miss. Could be dangerous if those outlaws are still around." "I've seen gunshot wounds before," she insisted. "And every minute counts. Is the marshal badly injured?" Peters hesitated. "Took a bullet to the shoulder. Lost blood but was conscious when I left. Doc Jenkins is out at the Miller farm for a birthing, won't be back till evening." "Then you need me," Josephine stated firmly. "I can stabilize him until the doctor returns." Her determination must have convinced him, for Peters nodded reluctantly. "All right, can you ride?" "Yes, but I sold my horse yesterday." "Take my wife's mare," offered one of the volunteers. "She's gentle but swift." 20 minutes later, Josephine found herself riding west with 6 armed men. The irony wasn't lost on her. Yesterday she'd been desperate to leave Fort Kearny, and now she was racing away from town, only to help the very man she'd been avoiding. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Peters raised his hand, signaling them to slow. "Should be just over this rise," he said. "Approach cautiously. Those bandits could still be nearby." They crested the hill to find a small grove of trees below. 2 horses were visible, tethered to a low branch. Isaac and his other deputy had taken cover in the trees. Peters cupped his hands around his mouth. "Marshal, it's Peters. We've brought help." After a moment, a weak voice called back. "All clear, Peters, they've gone." The group descended quickly. In the shade of a cottonwood, Isaac lay propped against the trunk, his shirt dark with blood on the left side. His face was pale but alert as they approached. The other deputy, a young man named Harris, stood guard nearby. Josephine dismounted and rushed to Isaac's side, her heart in her throat at the sight of him injured. "How bad is it?" she asked, already reaching to examine the wound. Isaac's eyes widened in surprise. "Miss Greene, "What are you doing here?" "Apparently saving your life," she replied, carefully pulling back his bloodied shirt to reveal a ragged wound in his upper shoulder. "The bullet went through," he managed, wincing as she probed gently. "Hurts like hell, but I don't think it hit anything vital." Josephine turned to Peters. "I need clean water, bandages, and whiskey if you have it." As the men scrambled to provide what she needed, she focused on Isaac, trying to ignore the fear clutching at her heart. "You're lucky. An inch lower and it might have pierced your lung." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Didn't know you cared, Miss Greene." "Don't flatter yourself," she retorted, though her hands trembled slightly as she cleaned away blood to better assess the wound. "I'd do the same for anyone." "Of course," he murmured, watching her face intently despite his pain. "Though I must say, this wasn't how I imagined getting you to stay in town another day." Despite everything, a laugh escaped her. "Your dedication to keeping visitors in Fort Kearny is remarkable, Marshal." His expression sobered. "Those men, they're the same ones who attacked the stage yesterday." Recognized one of them. "They've been terrorizing this stretch of trail for weeks." "Save your strength," she advised, accepting a canteen of water from Peters. "You can tell us all about it when you're not bleeding all over the Nebraska territory." For the next half hour, Josephine worked methodically to clean and bandage Isaac's wound, administering small sips of whiskey to dull his pain. The bullet had indeed passed cleanly through muscle, missing bone and major blood vessels. With proper care, he would recover fully. Once she had him bandaged, the men constructed a makeshift stretcher using blankets and tree branches. Isaac protested weakly that he could ride, but Josephine silenced him with a stern look. "You've lost too much blood," she insisted. "The last thing we need is you falling from your horse and undoing all my handiwork." He subsided with a sigh. "You're formidable when giving orders, Miss Greene." "You have no idea," she replied, a hint of her old self flashing through. The journey back to Fort Kearny was slow and cautious. Isaac drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain and blood loss taking their toll. Josephine rode beside the stretcher, monitoring him closely, her thoughts in turmoil. Seeing him wounded had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. The prospect of him dying had filled her with a dread that went beyond mere concern for a kind acquaintance. It was nearly sunset when they reached town. A crowd had gathered, word of the marshal's injury having spread. Dr. Jenkins, who had returned early from the Miller farm, met them at the sheriff's office. After a quick examination, he confirmed Josephine's assessment. "Clean through the muscle, missed anything vital. Good field dressing, too," he added with an approving nod to Josephine. "He'll need rest and to keep the wound clean, but he should recover without complications." Relief washed over her. "That's good to hear." The doctor eyed her curiously. "You have medical training, miss." "Some," she admitted. "My mother was a nurse during the war." "Well, you did fine work today. The marshal's lucky you were here." As the doctor continued tending to Isaac, now settled on a cot in his office behind the jail, Deputy Peters approached Josephine. "Miss Greene, I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "I shouldn't have dismissed your offer of help. The marshal might be in far worse shape if not for your skills." "No apology needed," she assured him. "I'm just glad I could help. We all are." He hesitated, then added, "The marshal was asking for you if you'd like to see him before you head back to the boarding house." Josephine nodded, suddenly nervous. She found Isaac propped up slightly on the cot, his shoulder freshly bandaged, color beginning to return to his face. The doctor had just finished giving him instructions about wound care. "Remember, no exertion for at least 2 weeks," Jenkins was saying sternly. "And change the bandages daily. I'll check on you tomorrow." As the doctor left, Isaac's gaze found Josephine hovering in the doorway. "Miss Greene," he said softly, "my guardian angel." She stepped inside, closing the door partially for privacy. "Hardly that. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," he replied with a wry smile, "but better than I might be thanks to you." His expression grew serious. "You didn't have to come, put yourself at risk. Why did you?" Josephine moved closer to his bedside, struggling to articulate feelings she barely understood herself. "I couldn't just let you die out there, not when I might help. Most people running from something wouldn't risk exposure to save a lawman," he observed quietly. She stiffened. "What makes you think?" "Josephine," he interrupted gently, "I may be injured, but my mind is clear enough. You're hiding something. Something serious enough that you risk traveling alone through dangerous territory rather than staying in one place too long." She remained silent, her heart pounding. "I'm not asking you to tell me," he continued. "That's your choice. But today, when Peters rode in saying there were bandits, you could have taken that opportunity to leave town while everyone was distracted. Instead, you rode out to help me." His blue eyes held her steadily. "That tells me something about your character, whatever your past may hold." Tears pricked at her eyes. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I'd like to," he replied simply. "If you'd let me." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. How long had it been since anyone had looked at her and seen more than a possession, a victim, or now a fugitive? "I should let you rest," she said, retreating a step. "The doctor said," "Josephine," Isaac called softly as she turned to leave. "Thank you. Truly." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and slipped out of the room. Outside, the main street of Fort Kearny was quiet in the gathering dusk. Josephine walked slowly toward the boarding house, her thoughts in chaos. Isaac would recover. The stage would likely depart tomorrow or the next day. She should be relieved her journey could continue as planned. Yet the prospect of leaving brought no comfort, only a hollow ache in her chest. At dinner, Widow Miller and the other boarders spoke of nothing but the Marshal's brush with death and Josephine's role in saving him. "Such bravery," Mrs. Miller declared, serving Josephine an extra portion of stew. "Riding out with those men, not knowing if the bandits might still be there. And then tending his wound so skillfully," Josephine demurred, uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone would have helped if they could." "Not anyone," countered an elderly gentleman at the table. "Takes real courage, especially for a young lady alone." The conversation continued around her, but Josephine's thoughts remained with Isaac. His words echoed in her mind. "I'd like to know you if you'd let me." Such a simple statement, yet it had shaken her to her core. After Francis, she'd sworn never to let another man close enough to hurt her. Yet Isaac Norwood had somehow slipped past her defenses in just a few days. Sleep came fitfully that night. In the morning, Josephine learned that the stage would depart the following day, the route having been deemed safe after patrols found no further sign of the bandits. She had one more day in Fort Kearny, one more day, to decide what to do about the marshal who had come to occupy so many of her thoughts. After breakfast, she found herself walking toward the sheriff's office before she could reconsider. Deputy Peters nodded a greeting as she entered. "Miss Greene." "Come to check on the patient. He's in a foul mood this morning, hates being confined to that cot." "I thought he might," she replied with a small smile. "May I see him?" Peters gestured toward the back room. "Be my guest. Maybe you can talk some sense into him. He's already tried to get up twice." She found Isaac sitting up on the edge of the cot, grimacing as he attempted to pull on a clean shirt one-handed. Without a word, Josephine moved to help him, carefully guiding his injured arm through the sleeve. "Stubborn man," she chided softly. "You're supposed to be resting." "I've rested enough," he grumbled, though he allowed her assistance. "Can't run a town from a sick. The town seems to be managing just fine for a day or two." She buttoned his shirt, acutely aware of his warmth and proximity. "Your deputies are competent." Isaac watched her face as she worked. "I hear the stage leaves tomorrow." "Yes." She finished the last button and stepped back. "The route's been declared safe. Will you be on it?" His voice was carefully neutral. Josephine hesitated. "That was my plan." And now she met his gaze directly. "I don't know." A long moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Isaac spoke again, his voice low and earnest. "Stay, Josephine, at least a little longer. Whatever you're running from, we can face it together." Her breath caught. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I know we've only just met, but I feel like I've been waiting to find you, as if all the paths I've walked were leading me to this moment." "Isaac," she began, her resolve wavering. "You don't have to tell me everything at once," he continued. "Trust takes time, but give us a chance to see if there might be something worth building here." Tears welled in her eyes. "My past is too dark," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'd regret entangling yourself with me." Isaac's blue eyes never left hers as he replied, "Then let me light your future." The simple sincerity of his words broke something open inside her. All the fear, pain, and loneliness she'd carried these past weeks rushed out in a flood of tears. Isaac pulled her gently to sit beside him on the cot, his good arm around her shoulders as she wept. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, Josephine found herself leaning against him, his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. "I killed my husband," she confessed quietly, the words hanging in the air between them. Isaac's arm tightened around her, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "His name was Francis Blackley. Wealthy, respected in St. Louis society." Her voice was steady now, as if relating someone else's story. "When we married, I thought I'd found happiness, but within months he changed. The first time he hit me, he wept afterwards, swore it would never happen again. I believed him." She felt Isaac's body tense but pressed on. "It only got worse. He was careful, never marked my face, always made sure the bruises could be hidden. When I tried to leave, he found me, dragged me back, locked me in our bedroom for days. When I went to the authorities, they refused to intervene. A domestic matter, they called it." "Bastards," Isaac murmured, his voice tight with anger. "3 weeks ago," Josephine continued, "he came home drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. Said he'd heard rumors I was planning to run again. He began beating me, worse than before. I knew this time he might not stop." She drew a shaky breath. "His pistol was on the dresser. We struggled for it. When it discharged, the bullet hit him in the chest. He died within minutes." She pulled away slightly to look at Isaac's face, searching for disgust or judgment. Instead, she found only compassion and a simmering anger that she instinctively knew was not directed at her. "I panicked," she finished. "Took what money I had saved, his horse, and fled. His family has connections everywhere in Missouri. They've put a bounty on my head, $500 for my capture. The poster calls it murder, doesn't mention any of what he did to me." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, processing her story. Finally, he asked, "Do you regret it? Defending yourself?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "I regret that it came to that. I regret not finding a way to escape sooner. But no, I don't regret surviving." He nodded slowly. "Nor should you. What happened was self-defense, not murder. A court might not see it that way," she said bitterly. "Not with his family's influence. Perhaps." Isaac took her hand in his. "But you don't have to face this alone anymore, Josephine. There are legal options we can pursue. I have connections to a judge in Omaha who's fair-minded, a lawyer in Denver who specializes in cases like yours. We can build a defense, gather evidence of his abuse." Hope flickered dimly, a sensation so unfamiliar it was almost painful. Why would you do this for me? Risk your reputation, your career?" Isaac's gaze was steady. "Because in the few days I've known you, I've seen your courage, your compassion, your strength. Because when I was lying wounded in those woods and saw you riding toward me, I knew you were someone worth fighting for." His voice softened. "And because I think I'm falling in love with you, Josephine Greene, dark past and all." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Josephine felt something shift inside her, as if frozen ground were beginning to thaw after a long winter. "I can't promise anything," she whispered. "I don't know if I can ever trust again, feel safe again." "I'm not asking for promises," he replied. "Just a chance. Stay in Fort Kearny. Let me help you build a legal defense. And perhaps, along the way, we'll discover what might grow between us." She thought of the stage leaving tomorrow, of the endless running that had been her plan. Then she thought of staying, of facing her past with someone beside her. The latter terrified her in a different way, not with the fear of capture, but with the fear of hope disappointed, of trust betrayed. Yet looking into Isaac's eyes, she saw something she'd thought forever lost to her, a future where she might not always be afraid. "All right," she said finally. "I'll stay. For now." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "That's all I ask." As the days turned to weeks in Fort Kearny, Josephine gradually settled into life in the small frontier town. She took a room at Widow Miller's on a more permanent basis and found employment assisting Dr. Jenkins, who was impressed with her medical knowledge. The work gave her purpose, and a small income of her own, important for a woman who had learned the hard way that independence was precious. Isaac recovered steadily from his wound, though he chafed at the restrictions on his activities. True to his word, he contacted his connections about Josephine's case, careful to keep her identity protected while he gathered information. The news was mixed. The bounty still stood, but no wanted posters had circulated this far west. Francis's family had influence, but primarily in Missouri and eastern Kansas. Distance provided some safety, at least for now. As spring deepened into summer, Josephine and Isaac's relationship evolved cautiously. He was patient, never pushing beyond what she was comfortable with, content with walks along the river, conversations over coffee at the boarding house, or quiet evenings on the porch of his small house at the edge of town. He shared stories of his own past, his childhood in Ohio, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war, his journey west in search of peace. For Josephine, trust returned in small increments. The first time she didn't flinch when Isaac moved suddenly near her. The first time she took his offered arm without hesitation while walking through town. The first time she found herself laughing freely, without the shadow of fear that had been her constant companion for so long. Their first kiss came on a warm June evening, as fireflies danced along the riverbank. It was gentle, undemanding, yet it awakened something in Josephine she had thought forever extinguished. When they pulled apart, she saw in Isaac's eyes the same wonder she felt, the recognition of something precious and fragile taking root between them. In July, news arrived from Isaac's lawyer friend in Denver. He had found witnesses, servants from the Blackley household who had seen Francis's abuse firsthand, but had been too afraid to speak out while he lived. With their testimony and evidence of his violent nature, the lawyer believed Josephine had a strong case for self-defense if she chose to return and face the charges. "It's your decision," Isaac told her as they discussed the letter in the privacy of his office. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you." Josephine considered her options carefully. She could continue hiding, always looking over her shoulder, never truly free. Or she could stand and fight with Isaac and others beside her now and reclaim her life and her name. "I want to face it," she decided finally. I'm tired of running." The trial took place in Denver that autumn. Isaac took a leave of absence from his position as marshal, deputizing Peters to oversee Fort Kearny in his absence. The journey to Colorado was tense, Josephine growing quieter the closer they came to having to relive the nightmare of her marriage in open court. Francis's family had indeed hired the best prosecutors money could buy. For 5 grueling days, Josephine endured their attempts to paint her as a cold-blooded murderess who had killed a prominent businessman for his fortune. But Isaac's lawyer friend was skilled, and the testimony of the household servants was damning. When Josephine finally took the stand, her quiet dignity and honest account of years of abuse moved many in the courtroom to tears. On the 6th day, the jury returned their verdict, not guilty. Self-defense had been proven to their satisfaction. Josephine was free, truly free for the first time in years. Outside the courthouse, away from the press of reporters and spectators, she collapsed into Isaac's arms, overcome with emotion. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over. You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You faced your past and won." That evening, in the privacy of their hotel room, Isaac knelt before Josephine and took her hands in his. "I promise to help light your future," he said softly. "Now that your past no longer casts its shadow, will you let me continue to walk beside you? As your husband, if you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she answered simply. "Yes." They married in Fort Kearny 2 weeks later, with the entire town turning out to celebrate. Widow Miller wept openly. Dr. Jenkins gave a toast that had everyone laughing, and Deputy Peters served as best man. As Josephine and Isaac exchanged vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers, she marveled at how far she had come from that frightened woman who had ridden into town months before. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also joy beyond measure. Isaac continued as marshal until 1880, when he and Josephine decided to fulfill his long-held dream of raising horses. They purchased land outside town and built a ranch they named New Dawn. Their breeding operation quickly gained reputation for producing some of the finest horses in the territory. In 1878, their son William was born, followed 2 years later by daughter Emma. Josephine, who had once believed happiness forever beyond her reach, found herself surrounded by love and purpose. She continued to assist Dr. Jenkins when needed, and became known throughout the region for her skill with both human and animal patients. As the 19th century drew to a close, and a new era dawned, Josephine and Isaac sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children playing in the yard with their newest addition, a spirited colt born just weeks before. Their hands, weathered now by years of work and weather, remained intertwined as naturally as 2 branches that have grown together. "You ever think about it?" Isaac asked quietly. "How differently our lives might have gone if you'd taken that stagecoach?" Josephine smiled, the lines at the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Sometimes. But then I look at all this," she gestured to their home, their children, their life together, "and I can't imagine any other path." Isaac brought her hand to his lips. "When you rode into Fort Kearny that day, I felt like something shifted in the world. As if the universe was saying, 'Pay attention, Norwood. This is important.' And here I thought it was just another dusty town to pass through," she teased. After a moment, her expression grew more serious. "You know, when I told you my past was too dark, I truly believed it. I thought I was beyond saving, beyond happiness. And I meant what I said about lighting your future," Isaac replied. "Though I think you had the light within you all along, you just needed someone to help you see it." From the yard came the delighted squeals of their children as the colt pranced around them, tossing his head in the golden afternoon light. Josephine leaned her head against Isaac's shoulder, a contentment so deep it bordered on awe filling her heart. Her past had indeed been dark, but their future glowed with a light no shadow could extinguish. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Isaac had given her, not just his love, but the courage to believe she deserved it. As the sun began to set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Josephine Greene Norwood said a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for bravery in the face of fear, and for the cowboy who had taught her that even the darkest night eventually gives way to dawn.